Well, hey there, and welcome back to Heimler's History, and furthermore, welcome to the last video of Unit 4 of the AP U.S. History curriculum. And that means it's time to talk about Southern culture and the early Republic, sugar. So get them brain cows ready, because I'm about to milk them Southern style. Let's get to it. Now, when we think about the South in the period 1800 to 1848, our imaginations are immediately taken over with images of sprawling cotton plantations worked by large numbers of enslaved laborers. And that's definitely a true image, but in reality, the majority of white farmers in the South did not own enslaved laborers. In fact, they were known as yeoman farmers, which just means they were independent farmers who worked their own plot of land. And while most of these yeoman farmers did believe in slavery, they did on occasion challenge the goals of the planter elite. Some of them, especially those who were on the western frontier of the nation, called for the gradual abolition of slavery because they could see how the system of enslaved labor disadvantaged them, especially when they had to work from dawn till dusk with their own hands. And as these farmers gained more and more voting rights in the 1830s and the 1840s, they sought to influence state legislatures about their political concerns. However, due to the fact that cotton was the king of the Southern economy, there was very little they were able to do in order to adjust the system to their advantage. And then elite planters faced further trouble as nations around the world, from Europe to South America, began abolishing slavery. With this movement in the air, maybe most notably Britain's emancipation of all of its slaves in 1834, the abolitionist movement we talked about in another video started picking up steam, and that started making the Southern plantation owners a little twitchy. But these elite white folks, scrappy as they were able to unify the larger population of Southern whites under their economic and political control so that slavery had no chance of disappearing. For example, thanks to the 3/5 Compromise right there in the U.S. Constitution, those states with large enslaved populations had a much larger voice in Congress and state legislatures than they should have. You had a tiny amount of elite slaveholders who owned a lot of enslaved people, and that fact made it possible for them to have political influence all out of proportion to their numbers. Planters also consolidated their power by making loans to those in need, and they hired poor whites for work when they needed it, and they used their resources to transport the crops of yeoman farmers to the market. And all that is to say that even if most white folks in the South didn't participate in the institution of slavery, they had massive incentives not to mess with the system because the planter elites had made white society dependent upon themselves. And so, starting especially in the 1830s, white planters worked hard to coalesce the white population of the South, no matter the class, around the idea of white supremacy. Even if white people's economic or political interests differed according to class, one thing they could all rally around was the superiority of the white race. Apologists for this kind of thinking, like Thomas Dew, argued powerfully and persuasively for the positive good of slavery. Now, this was not the way the founders of America in general thought about slavery. And it's true that folks like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, they were themselves Virginia planters with a host of enslaved people who worked for them, but their relationship to slavery was kind of a tortured one. They had serious moral reservations about it, and they even believed it to be evil, but they had too much on the line economically to really do anything about it. Put that in contrast with the kind of thinking going on in this period, and the difference is kind of astonishing. For example, let me just read you an excerpt from a speech from John C. Calhoun, who was a South Carolina man and the Vice President of the United States to boot. He said, "I hold that in the present state of civilization, where two races of different origin and distinguished by color and other physical differences, as well as intellectual, are brought together, the relation now existing in the slaveholding states between the two is, instead of an evil, a good, a positive good. There has never yet existed a wealthy civilized society in which one portion of the community did not in point of fact live on the labor of the other. Broad and general as is this assertion, it is fully borne out by history. I fearlessly assert that the existing relation between the two races in the South, against which these blind fanatics are waging war, forms the most solid and durable foundation on which to rear free and stable political institutions." So not only does Calhoun justify slavery on economic grounds, but also on moral grounds, like the mastery of the white race over the black race, he argues, is the glue that holds the very core of Southern society together. And with that kind of ideology taking root in the South, the planter elite forged bonds with the lower white classes and established a stronghold on Southern culture. Well, alright, that's what you need to know about Unit 4, Topic 13 of the AP U.S. History curriculum. And if you need help getting an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May, then get that clicky finger out and grab my view packet right here. If you want me to keep making videos for you, then the way you let me know that is by hitting that subscribe button over there. Heimler out.